Planning Commission to order. We do have a quorum. Thank you all for coming. I think everyone's here. I don't really have any remarks other than to thank everybody for being here and thanking you for your interest. Do you all have any comments?
Nice to see so many people here.
Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes from our May 7th meeting? And we'll entertain a motion regarding those.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes from May 7th of this year, say aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed? No one? The minutes have been approved as presented. Staff and committee reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Like you, I don't really have a lot of comments germane to the operating items of the commission, but we'll note the presence of our cameras, and that is something that we adopted while we were under the stay-at-home protocols, but we've decided to continue broadcasting for items particularly of public interest, in the interest of transparency and, including our citizens. So since we have an important topic tonight, that's why the cameras are here. If you have any specific concerns or directions about being on camera in subsequent meetings, you can let us know, but we'd like to try to continue to do this as much as we can. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have related to town matters at this point.
I don't think I have any at this point. Anyone else? No? Thank you, Mr. Warner. We'll move on to the public hearing section of our meeting, which is consideration of amending the Bedford Middle School campus rezoning and conditional use permit at 503 and 507 Longwood Avenue, Bedford, Virginia. The tax parcel numbers are 194A, 170T, 17451T, 17452T, 17453T, 17454T. Consisting of approximately 9.54 acres located on the north side of Longwood Avenue and Peak Street and parcels along Westview Avenue. To remove the auditorium and increase the number of apartment units to 60, the request is being made by Waukesha Development, Inc. for Old Yellow LLC at 245 East Bank Street, Petersburg, Virginia. Do we have anyone who would like to speak to that? If we do, would you please come to the podium, state your name?
I'll be the guinea pig. My name's Tony Clater. I live in Bedford, Virginia. Been here all my life. My concern with this thing here is, one, the deal that was done in the very beginning was not, as far as I'm concerned, negotiated very well as far as the taxpayers of Bedford know how. Nevertheless, it was done, so we got to deal with it. My understanding is the deal, he was to keep the auditorium intact, keep it up for the community use. They was going to give him the property. I understand he gave him $400,000 too in order to do that. Okay. It was a sad thing. Some idiot went in there and burned it down. But nevertheless, the deal still stands, and the developer needs to still go on. If he didn't have enough insurance to put everything back like it needed to be, that's his problem. He can take what insurance money he's got, the rest of it out of his pocket, but it needs to be put back like it was. I don't know the exact number of apartments he was planning on putting in there to start with. But I can tell you for sure, Bedford cannot absorb 60-unit apartments in town. We have adequate rental property in town now. I myself am an investor. I've been investing here for 30 years. Friends of mine, which a couple of them couldn't make it tonight, but they'll be here Tuesday, feel the same way. We've been here all our life, and we've invested in this town and our rental units and stuff like that, and we have them up where, they're bringing in decent rent and so forth, such as that. You bring an influx of 60 units in when you have nobody to put in them, it's going to create a problem. It's going to cause the ones that's already here to lose money in the long run. Now, a prime example is the one he's already got down there on Jackson Street. I've heard that they stay full and have 100 people on the waiting list, and I do not believe that. They keep a sign up out front all the time, constantly, 1 and 2 bedroom units available. So I really don't believe that. But the thing of it is, he agreed to a deal, he needs to stick to the deal. The council, town management, everybody will be doing this, citizens and the taxpayers of Bedford will distrust if they allow any changes to this. Furthermore, I really think this meeting here, as far as rezoning, is putting the cart before the horse. Unless it's something secretly been done where they've told him already that they would renegotiate it, there's no need to change the zoning at this point. I do not see it, don't understand why it's even happening the way it's happening. He does not have approval on doing away with the auditorium at this point. And there again, you know, it's a bad thing that happened. But you know, if you're a developer, you should have adequate insurance on whatever you got. I have investment property and I have replacement costs on it. That would have been a smart thing to do. The other smart thing to do was, now I heard, I don't know if this is a rumor or not, or if it's true or not, but it had alarm systems in the school that would have alerted somebody that there was a fire. It wasn't a sprinkler system, but I understand that the power was cut off to the building, so the alarm systems couldn't work. So, you know, to me, that wasn't very smart either. But, you know, the council people that was in place at the time, you know, I really don't think they thought it through. They spent enough time on it. You know, this guy just, they think he's a hero, and I think differently, okay? But y'all need to protect the people that's been here and lives here and been here all their life. And if y'all allow this to happen, I mean, putting a 60-unit influx in, right here in town, it's not going to work. It's not enough people out here needing it, okay? And, you know, it's just, and like I said, this should not even be happening tonight. And it should not, the agreement should not be changed, period. He can put it back, do what he promised, and that's just the way it's going to have to be, as far as I would be concerned. That's pretty much kind of what I've covered most all of it, I think, for the time being. But y'all need to think real hard about rezoning this thing, especially tonight. Because you're going to be doing, again, the citizens that's been here all their life an injustice if you do. It's going to cost us money. Just because everybody wants to make this deal work, and it wasn't the best deal to start with, they could have took a little more time, and they had other people interested in it, but they just didn't want to hear any of that. And if he increases it to 60 units, look at all the extra parking he's going to have. And I would think you'd need two spots per unit, you know, and if you did, that's 120 parking spaces more you got to have. Look, I don't know if you had that much traffic when the school was going. And then I've got other issues with it too, which I don't really need to go into that tonight, but one of them was, it was assessed at $7-some odd million originally, and then right before that deal with him was being done, it was reduced to 1.8. You know, that's, my calculations, that was like $40-some thousand between the town and the county tax that they was losing every year. So, and can't nobody answer the question as to why, who done it. So there's a whole lot of questions here that haven't been answered. Some people can't answer them. And, you know, something's just real bad about this whole thing, but he needs to be held to his original deal. He don't need no more apartments than he originally requested. It needs to stay the same, and the deal needs to stay the same. And again, if he didn't have enough insurance on it, that's his problem. He just has to take money out of his pocket to fix it back like it was. That's all I got right now, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Claytor. Would anyone else like to speak?
Well, I think you know who I am, but I'll tell you anyway.
Thank you.
I'm Ann Suhanoff, and I live at 512 Peak Street, next door to the former middle school. And I just had a couple of questions here. For the basis of this particular hearing, which of course is occurring long after the arson fire, I just wanted to know if y'all are using the 6 original documents that were signed either on April 9th, 10th, or on the 18th of 2019. That would be the performance review documents, the deed of trust, the promissory note, and so on. Or have any of these documents been amended by anybody after the January 23rd fire? And the reason I ask this is council, as I understand it, has allowed time extension for Mr. McCormick as a result of the fire. So I wondered if changes had been made and if y'all are using a different set of documents from the ones that I was given that are signed and notarized on the 18th of April. No?
I don't believe that those have been changed. Is that correct, Mr. Warner? No, nothing has been changed.
And I can speak to that.
Yeah, I'll move over.
I'm sorry, no, don't want to
I'll move
correct
over. We'll be here together.
Yes, and to answer Ms. Sewell's question, those have not been amended. They will need to be, given the change in scope. And actually, 2 processes have to take place, both an amendment to the conditional use permit that Planning Commission recommended and Council approved previously, and then a reflection of the changes in scope into the performance agreement. They're 2 separate processes, but they are kind of dependent on each other, just to explain that from an administrative
When will
perspective.
they be, when will these amendments take place? After the council approves, if they approve?
Yes, they're dependent on one another. And council is working to address changes in the other documents.
Will the public be allowed to see that before any finalization occurs?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure we were all on the
May
same.
I ask Mr. Warner one more question?
Yeah.
Could you address Mr. Clater's concern regarding the why we are talking about doing the rezoning tonight?
Oh, again, they're 2 separate processes that are related to each other. We're doing it tonight because this is the regular meeting of the Planning Commission. That's the only
Yeah,
reason.
we hadn't met during the quarantine. It probably would have been done sooner.
And what zoning is going to be changed? I mean,
The only thing we're talking about is amending the conditional use permit. And the
it's
change
not a
is
zoning change, it's a.
not a zoning change. The zoning,
That's erroneous.
correct.
And the conditional use has changed because of no auditorium, is that the idea?
Essentially, no auditorium and an addition of
An
10.
increase of how many apartments?
10.
10.
10 total.
Okay.
Leave you the podium.
Oh, thank you. All right, since we've got the, we're all on the same page of the handle, then I have a question about the lease. And I don't know whether y'all have the lease in front of you, but I can tell you in the performance review packet, it's page 21. And a question I have about the lease refers to paragraph 15, section A, which I'm going to read to you directly from the copy of the documents that my attorney got from Mr. Lockerbie a while back. It says the performance default shall occur if, number 1, the lessee fails to receive historic preservation certification, part 1 and 2 conditional, and commence construction and renovation activity not later than noon on the first day of the 12th month from the commencement of the term of this lease, unless this lease is either terminated, as evidenced by issuance of a building permit and substantial actual construction activity, or 2, construction activity ceases on the property for 6 or more consecutive months after having been initially commenced. Now, my question is, what is this? Do you know, has anybody from the Economic Development Authority informed you of the status of the historic preservation and certification? And have you viewed the filed certificate of principal advances, that is monetary advances, the $400,000 from the Economic Development Authority? Because I think it's of interest to me as a neighbor, of course, but especially as a general taxpayer, as to how that $400,000 was spent, when it was spent, and whether or not we have any results from the historic certification activity. Because otherwise, if we don't have any evidence of any progress there, how can you even begin to approve any of this for council's consideration? And that's just a question I have. There are a lot of questions I have, but that's a key one. The other one, of course, is in all of the documents that I saw, or at least most of them, there are stipulations that he's supposed to take care of the property. And I didn't see it being taken care of because I lived next door and I saw the police over there constantly in the summer of 2019, and I saw progressive vandalism. And I read in the newspaper and I read reports that came through the police department that vandals were getting in through unlocked doors, unsecured windows, broken windows that weren't being repaired. And he was supposed to take care of this property. It was in excellent condition when he got it. And I'm speaking of the middle school now. I'm not talking about all y'all. And he actually admitted in the newspaper not long ago that it was in excellent condition. And of course now it's a burned out shell. And I almost brought shards of what's left of it in here, but I thought that would be hyperbolic, so I didn't. But our yard is full of toxic substances that used to be the school. We can't open our windows on the school side because there's ground glass, and I'm not talking about pieces that you can see. I'm talking about aerosolized, pulverized glass that will be blowing in through the screens into the house. And so I just feel that he did not fulfill many of the provisions of the performance agreement. There may be some outlets where he can wiggle around, wiggle room here and there, but I don't think that he followed the spirit of the agreement, even if maybe he could say that he followed the letter of it. And I do think that we need to know what the accountability of the $400,000 of taxpayers' money is, also that Tony Clater alluded to in a different format. So these are questions that I think you might want to consider before deciding that you want to give him these approvals. And I think City Council needs to hear more about this. And I do feel that there probably would have been other people who might have come up with better ideas. That's all over the dam now. We can't do anything about it, but I do believe that when somebody signs an agreement, they either have to adhere to it or it has to be terminated. And I really thank you for listening to me. And, oh, I wanted to give you this. I don't know who to give it to, probably Bart, but
just flew off into our front yard like a lot of us don't, so that's all.
and that's the sign that tells people to stay away that I think the building inspector had put up, and it was a rather flimsy thing, and yesterday during a windstorm it blew in our yard. We want you to have it back.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Teresa Canode, and I'm representing my husband and I both. His work requires that he travel, so he's out of town tonight, unfortunately. We live at 502 Longwood Avenue. If you're standing in the former Dr. Woodruff's office, we are the next house, the yellow with green shutters. So we are neighbors. We have tremendous concerns that we probably should have, in hindsight, put in better places last summer. We were in shock because we've been here 32 years, and last summer when the power was turned off on the building, as Mr. Clater indicated, it was a huge surprise to us because in the evenings our area of the street is like living in a park, and it's been beautiful. And you can sit on our front porch and enjoy the loop trail with everyone walking by. And it's quite, I believe Mary Zirkle would probably agree, it's one of our greatest assets in the town. And so it's something that everyone treasures. So this project not only impacts one thing, it impacts two. It impacts what we're speaking of this evening, but it also impacts this walking loop trail, which most of the realtors tout as something that's important in our town. So last summer, when the power went off across the street, we were immediately surprised because the whole grounds were dark, pitch dark, which meant that all these young people just walking the trail at night were in harm's way. Because if you're on our porch, you can watch people walking at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm taking my husband to the airport at 5 in the mornings, and you can watch people walking the trail at 5 in the morning. And so when the whole campus is dark, it's not a safe situation. We had been very concerned, and my husband made the comment after the fact, after the fire, why was this property allowed to go into that condition? And when there were break-ins, as we became aware of, as you did, as you mentioned, and I think probably, to put it in short, is if we called Todd Foreman and we had a break-in in our house, and there were no lights on in our house, and our house had no way to look illuminated on the grounds or the house at night, and our home was broken into, I can't speak for Todd Foreman, but he probably would say, well, had you thought about lighting your property? Wouldn't that be what most of us? Isn't that common knowledge that if you've got a property, you've got to keep it lighted? Or else you're asking for results. So why, when the middle school and Old Yella are one of the greatest assets along with this whole property, why was this allowed to go into this situation? So I'm speaking to agree with what I've heard tonight and came primarily just to state this. We have an issue already of accountability, and I'm not saying that to slander. I'm just saying that there's accountability issue that we feel has allowed this issue to be of great concern of why we're sitting here right now. And the other thing is our concern for the walking trail. We already don't have parking. Sometimes people can't figure out why they're supposed to park across the street. Sometimes the ties are down, sometimes the ties are up. We have just witnessed, heartbreakingly, this beautiful graduation garden across the street in the last couple weeks, and no one could get there easily except for a couple of days to get to it. And so Woodruff's Eye Doctor's lot has become encroached with parking, which it's not supposed to be, from the walkers. Where are they supposed to go? What are we going to supply for them to park? There's questions that we have to preserve that, because that's an important piece of town. And so walkers are parking over there. We have kids in there. That's a parking lot where people can cut up through the back. We've watched almost miss disastrous. We watched kids out there on scooters that were going to, people take their kids on bikes and scooters on the trail. They're parking over there. When people cut up through the back of that parking lot, they cut up fast. They're cutting through to avoid going through the corner. And we watched kids almost get hit the other evening. My husband said, we're going to have to talk to Connie and the doc about, this, because we're sitting here watching all this. Do they need to put something across the front of their parking lot in the evenings? I know these are maybe things that you wouldn't know, which is why I'm standing here tonight, taking your time. Because if you were sitting on her porch or on our porch, then you'd see a great deal more. So what we're asking for is, we are against adding more apartments. We already have a parking issue. We think the neighborhood, we've tried to do our part to bring our home into a status where when people come off the peaks of Otter, they look and say, wow, this is a historic district. This is a nice town. And we think about that. If you drive by our house at night, there's candles all in the windows. 24/7 around the clock. It's because we're trying to make a cheerful place for people to enjoy that spot for visitors. And if this project does not go through, as it's already has not, if it does not go through, then I can't imagine what we're all going to be sitting, dealing with in the future months for property values and for safety in the neighborhood. Thank you for taking time to hear this.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? No? If not, we will move on to new business, which is to recommend or not recommend amending the Bedford Middle School campus rezoning into a conditional reuse permit at 503 and 507 Longwood Avenue, Bedford Avenue, Virginia 24523, to remove the auditorium and increase the number of apartment units to 60. Do we have a motion? We'll have a motion and then we'll have discussion.
With discussion.
We're gonna have this.
We will have discussion.
Move to accept this, you mean? Or move not to accept?
Either way,
I move that we can't accept it right now.
do we have a second?
I'm sorry, what's the motion?
The motion was to reject the offer.
To approve the-
Disapprove it, no.
Oh, to disapprove it?
Right, correct.
I would second that.
In discussion.
I think we need answers to some of the questions that the folks have raised here. I mean, I think it's important to address the issues for us. I mean, we were going to do this building with the auditorium. I understand that, I don't know what the economic impact was going to be on the property and on the owner, but certainly it looks to me like that's probably going to raise about $96,000 a year in revenue for an extra. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm just saying that if you could have done it without the 96,000 before, why do we have to do it now and increase, like you say, increase parking, which is already a premium, let's face it. And about the other issues in terms of, I think we need an answer to what's going on with the $400,000. And maybe that's already been addressed, but you know, where that money is at this point. And then, kind of questions that people brought up about the power being turned off and some negligence issues. I mean, I don't know what we'll do if it doesn't go through, but I think some of these folks have raised really good questions, and I think they need good answers before we can go ahead on considering this. So that's my thought. Is someone here willing to address, I mean, Mr. McCormick, are you willing to address any of the issues that the folks have raised here?
I would say I'm unwilling to get into the details about some of this stuff, just because there's some lack of knowledge about some of the technical details about this stuff. I don't think this is the forum for that kind of stuff right now. So I'm willing to speak to the project, but that would be, if you wanted me to answer some questions.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's my 2 cents. I think we need answers to the questions these folks have brought up. They're, I think, legitimate questions, and brought up in good faith. I mean,
Would you like to address the reason why you are saying that you're not able to proceed with renovating the auditorium? I'm sorry to put you on the spot if I am, but.
Sure.
that might be
My name is Dave
helpful.
McCormick, and the developer on the project. In very basic terms, before the building was damaged, it was in really good shape. Then it's a tragedy what happened. The fact of the matter is, what we were doing with the auditorium was simply just preserving it in place. It wasn't going to be any kind of an income generator. We were trying to, partner with the community on keeping it and having, I know that at least the symphony wanted to be in there maybe once or twice a year, and that was really all the use it was going to get. So now that we've had the fire, to put that back will cost a lot of money, and it'll still only get used once or twice a year. So from the standpoint of, I don't like to think about all these projects just in strict financial terms. That's not why we do this stuff. I agree, it's an amazing historic building, and the neighborhood's amazing. But I also really like being a part of the community and helping bring back these derelict buildings. And whether or not, regardless of condition it was in, I don't think people realize how tenuous the situation really was. There's really was no real good outcomes for that building. So what Terry thinks it could just be sold to somebody else, or it was really worth $8 million, is really just not really paying attention to the facts. It was not just, it was worth nothing, and I would argue it was worth negative dollars. And now that's a very difficult concept for a lot of people to understand, that a building could be worth less than zero, but that's the facts. There's a massive liability for this town. So when I came along, that's why I was willing to, at least to preserve that auditorium, because it was in good condition. And I love the idea that the symphony could use it. That was a really neat thing. I really didn't see a whole lot of other use for it, but I was willing to do that. Now that it's been destroyed by an arsonist, the issue now is, do we build it back so the symphony can use it twice a year? I don't think, it really doesn't make financial sense to do that. And there's not going to be an outcome where that actually happens. Whether or not, if you vote this down and the council votes it down, it's not going to happen. And I don't mean to say that, like, with any negative feelings. It's just the facts of the matter. So, but what can happen is we can add a little more life to the building and bring some new residents in. Frankly, I get a kick out of hearing from folks like Terry saying something's not going to work. And I remember Mr. Owen standing there next to me in the parking lot when we put the other apartments online, and he spit on the ground right next to me. He said, this is never going to work. And it's working so well that we need more of it. So adding another 10 units really only is a net positive for the town. And instead of having a quantity of square footage that only gets used twice a year, we actually can bring more revenue and more people that will go and use the services and the businesses that are around here. I heard that same thing about Beals. It's never going to work. Why would you ever do something in Bedford, Virginia? And it's working really, really well. And that brand is now out there in the community all over the state, representing not just me and Beals, but the town of Bedford. And I think that's really cool. So I understand the anger from the neighbors and why they call the DEQ and complain, but I also know that they're operating from some misinformation. There's no, they complain to the DEQ that there's asbestos in the building. There's not. And they came today and we proved that to be correct. I understand why they're mad, but at the same time we're talking about a bigger problem to solve, and that's a community-wide problem, not just for the next door neighbor. So we want to make it a financially successful project. It's as simple as that. There will be no circumstance at the end of this project where people walking the loop find permanent parking on this property. It's going to be private property. So parking, whether or not it's tight now or tight later, it's not going to exist at all for the folks walking the loop. It's not going to be public parking. So that is a non-issue, and it's a misstatement of fact. What we're trying to do very simply is create a situation where I can fix the building. It's been destroyed by a criminal. I'm as upset by it, maybe more so than the folks talking here today. And I want to fix it. And this is a good financial solution and a concession to do that. It's not a big ask, but it just helps make the project whole. And it helps get it done. And without it, there may be no project at all. And honestly, that's a way worse outcome than just conceding to the auditorium. And that's it.
Can you address the concern about the $400,000?
It's very well documented. And again,
okay.
Misinformation or a lack of facts does not make for a crime scene or anything like that. Yeah, so, and the answer, very simply, is it's well documented. When we ask for the money to be paid, we have a list of vendors that we pay with it. And that is well documented at the town. A FOIA request would solve the thing in a second. Okay. So I would encourage anybody, if you want to know where the money went, just ask. But I don't want to turn it into a conspiracy here at a planning commission meeting. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
So So,
It's my understanding that restoring the auditorium, the cost of that would be approximately $3 million.
that we were rounding numbers based
Right.
on,
Yeah.
some estimates and having done things like that in the past. It is a really high number. And again, it's only because the condition it was in that it made any sense to preserve
Right.
it.
It was,
Ultimately,
it
it
was
was
not going to cost you a lot to keep it there.
Next to nothing,
Except
right.
it would keep you from building 10 more units.
That's it.
Right.
So it really doesn't make sense to build it back now, the way that it was. Regardless, I mean, I loved it as much as everybody. I know it had great history, but it really doesn't make sense to rebuild it like that again. So that's all.
It's not economically feasible.
It's
I know that the
exactly.
town doesn't have the 3 million. I know that 3 million is,
Yeah,
small.
and it's not a financeable solution.
Right.
That's all.
Insurance, getting to the question, insurance would not pay to rebuild the auditorium.
Right, I mean, when we insure a building and a project like this, we're not insuring to what the building was. And that's a really, really important concept. We're insuring for what we're going to do. So if there's some misconception about being underinsured, that's just simply a lack of understanding about how these things work. We're never insuring so that we were ever going to put it back like a school. We're insuring to what we need to underpin the project moving forward. So we didn't insure the auditorium as if it was going to be an auditorium again if we brought it back. It's just that simple. We're insuring to just take again, keep the financials intact, and we have that. We can move forward with it. But the ROI of the building, the financials of the building weren't based on that auditorium, and that's a really important concept.
So the insurance will bring it back to what state? I mean, just 4 walls, because obviously you're not going to rebuild. You are going to have to reconfigure the interior space, right? To get apartments.
We will.
So now you're just being built from scratch. You're going to have.
Yeah, it's a
footprint, and you're going to rebuild it inside.
That's right.
Which are probably going to be less money, maybe overall, than reconfiguring it.
No, it'll add more money. So we're going to end up borrowing more to get this project done. But if we borrow more, I've got to be able to substantiate that in underwriting. And that's why we're adding these units to the project.
So you need the additional revenue to make it work, is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Plus, you just can't leave square footage sitting there, right?
Right. I mean, and so at the end of the day, this is a historic tax credit project. That was referenced in one of the comments about where that all was. And again, the lack of information on that does not make for a conspiracy. We have put it on the register, done all that work. That's part of where the money went from the city to pay those consultants and pay the Department of Historic Resources to do that work. But we have to do something. We can't just leave an empty hole. We have to do something as part of the Part 2 application. And either you go back to an auditorium or we go back to something. The auditorium part is not an underwritable thing, so it's theoretically possible, but it physically won't happen. So we're proposing this alternative use.
Can I ask about the grant money? When you were here in October, you said if you do anything, if you touch anything different, you lose all your grant money. Did you lose all your grant money? Is the grant money now that the whole building is obviously changed?
You talking about historic tax credit?
Excuse me?
Historic tax credits?
Well, you referred to it as grant money, I believe.
Okay.
Is that, maybe I'm using that when you were here in October, I was asking you at the time about if ironically, the discussion was about fire safety. It's a joke now, but it was fire safety, and we were asking had a motion for 30 days extension to look at it, and you said it's not going to happen. And so you won that round about not looking any further into fire safety. And I asked about at the time about those metal racks or metal covers between Old Yeller and the high school. If you could put a road through there
I remember that.
and allow more access and give relief off of that corner over there for these folks that live on that corner.
Right.
And you said it was impossible, that you had to leave that, you could not change anything. I imagine it's in the minutes somewhere, where you say you cannot change anything.
Right.
Okay, so now can you change anything?
So-
What's the deal?
Right, so this is a very complex question, okay? When we were talking at the time, I think you were asking, could I just remove those things and put more parking back there, grant
No,
access?
I was
to the
asking
building?
about getting, let's just be clear, I don't want to be
Sure.
misunderstood.
Uh-huh.
We were talking about the concern about fire safety. And you give the impression that you had it all covered, and if we give you 30 more, if we took 30 more days, the phrase you used a while ago is not gonna happen. And so it moved forward, let me say, it moved forward. So they didn't look at the 30 days, the fire safety or anything. But at the time, what I was asking about is, could you put a road or an access or driveway, whatever you want to call it, on that side of the building to relieve the parking and the ins and out of apartments coming in and out. I think it's obvious how close these folks live to it, at least on that side and everything.
Right.
And which raises another question now, if you're going to put more apartments in there, where in the world are you going to put the parking? I mean, are you going to be able now to tear down the cafeteria?
No. So the parking, when we planned the parking, we were planning it for the use group that was around that auditorium, which has a really big demand for parking. Now that the auditorium's not going to be there, I think the parking actually doesn't get any worse. I don't know if you've seen the calculations we've done, but it doesn't change a whole lot of anything. What it does is take the use of that square footage that was for an auditorium that had a theoretical occupancy, because remember, it's only going to get used once or twice a year.
Okay.
That had a theoretical parking occupancy that was pretty big. Now that it's only going to be a handful of apartments, we don't need all that parking for it. That goes away. And then we just add back in the parking for the apartments. So the stress on parking doesn't change. And that's why I'm saying the misinformation around parking, it's not a valid argument. It's not increasing or decreasing, and the folks that walk the loop won't use it anyway. So it's irrelevant in terms of the town's general stress around parking. Back to your original question though, if the developer wants to change something that's of historical significance, that's relevant to the period of significance, that's what we call it in the industry, you can't do it. You'll have your plans rejected. But if the building now catches on fire, that event changes a lot of things. But the developer didn't go in there and modify the building and take that historic fabric away. There was a disaster. And so some accommodation can be made for those things. I still, even with a burned out building, am under the same purview and is subject to the same standards. It's just that some of the things we're saving now may not exist anymore.
Okay.
But that walkway thing is actually still there, so I still have to keep it.
Okay, you're going to keep the walkway there?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's interesting, all right.
I had a question, Mr. McCormick. Before we go, I want to ask Mr. McCormick a quick question. If you hold on one second. Wait, ma'am. I want to ask Mr. McCormick. Yes. Dave, maybe I'm making this too succinct, but is the project viable without this amendment?
It's not.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important that, I'm glad that you asked, because this is not for, my benefit, it's to add more money to the thing. It's to make it financeable. It's really that simple.
I just had one more question, Bart. There was a lot of players in this when, and I can't name everybody, but let's say school-to-school group, people that wanted to see this school saved and everything. Have all of the groups has this been discussed with them? Because I know auditorium was a key point with folks, whether it's gonna be used twice a year or every weekend. But I know that was a big issue at the time. As far as I know, it was a big issue at the time, and you had meetings and input from community groups and everything. And I just wonder about, has this been discussed with them whatsoever?
I think it's fair to say they're fully aware of it, and I can't speak for them, and Mr. McCormick can vouch for this. I have told him several times that the auditorium was widely viewed as a cherished community asset that was lost. So that makes this an enormously difficult conversation for us to have. The other thing I'll tell you is that's the purpose for this hearing. Anyone who wants to speak to that is eligible. I can tell you that the community orchestra is pursuing grant funding for the Susie Gibson Auditorium. I guess I can be okay with saying that. But as far as the players, let me answer and let me address some of the questions that Mr. and Mrs. Sulanov have. The question before you is the zoning matter and the proposed change of use. And let me remind you, when you get to vote, the motion before you is to deny. So an affirmative vote is to deny the project. The performance agreement is between Waukesha, the town council, and the Economic Development Authority. The Planning Commission is simply not party to that, and it's outside their purview. With regard to the $400,000, I can speak to that, and it's a matter of public record. The Economic Development Authority has dispersed approximately $160,000. I would have had that information tonight, but again, I didn't know I needed it. We'll certainly provide that to anyone who needs it and in advance of the council meeting. But the Economic Development Authority did approve at a public meeting, and we can show the spreadsheet and the reference to the agreement where that money went. So I can answer those questions.
And Bart, would you agree, you've heard this, it sounds like many of these questions are really more suited to you and maybe the council. I mean, we're looking at an amendment, adding some apartments, right?
This is an advisory board.
Right, to recommend to the council. And these questions are valid and understood, but it's not really the planning commission's.
They are, and we can not recommend it, and council can still override us, correct?
I guess that's correct, yes.
I will say that, we put this project out to bid to find anyone that might be interested in renovating it and doing something with it. The only other options that were presented to us, I believe there were 3 other parties that were interested in it, and their solution was just to make it low-income housing with no historic preservation whatsoever. Mr. McCormack was the only person that came forward out of, advertising this to an open public for someone to come in and take on this project. And he was the only one that had historic preservation in mind and had market rent in mind. I would hate to see us discourage him from pursuing this project, because I think our only other alternative is to see the building become in worse and worse shape and more vandalism and God only knows what. I mourn the loss of the auditorium. I think we all do, but it's gone, To replace it back the way it was is not economically feasible. I don't think that we would ever get anyone back in that would be able to do that economically, from a financial standpoint, even though Mr. McCormick says finances aren't the priority. I think that's true of the community too. I think that we would like to see the historic nature of the property and the whole aura of the property remain the same. That's my opinion. Anyone else?
I agree with that.
Okay.
Could I just add something? It has
Sure.
nothing to do with what you said. I just really wanted to let everybody know that as a citizen, I have a right to ask questions without being accused of being a conspiracy theorist. and offering misinformation. It just so happens that the police detective who came over and interviewed us after the fire told me that he had been arguing with Mr. McCormick for 6 months trying to get the security and fire systems reinstated into the building. Now that's a fact from the police, okay? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Somebody made a bad choice. The building burned. An arsonist burned it. I'm not going down that road again, but I deal in facts. I also have a complete right to go to the DEQ at any time as a citizen, because when I go out in my backyard, I start choking and almost vomiting from the foul smell that's in the ground around the area where the school burned. And that's not being a conspiracy theorist. I had the perfect right to do it. I got a personal letter from the director of the DEQ who referred my letter to an investigator, because we didn't have any idea whether there were any toxic substances still in that pit of that building, and that's what we call it. And I did not accuse him of having asbestos. I said, I don't know whether there's asbestos. There was supposed to be asbestos abatement. That was all part of the due diligence process. We never got a certificate of environmental impact. We never saw a thing from the town. We never saw anything from him. We didn't even know whether any of this the environmental aspects had been followed as per the performance agreement. And so these are questions. I started out by saying these are questions. And I get accused of being a conspiracy theorist and a purveyor of misinformation, and I'm not.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't think that we were accusing, anyone was accusing you personally of being a conspiracy theorist. This is a small town and people talk. And it's not always true what we hear, as we all know, and we're just trying to clear the waters.
Well, I just take my facts from the police, from
Okay.
the fire department, from the fire marshal.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate your concern about the environmental. Yeah. Go ahead, Tony. You want to come up here?
You know, I still say, I mean, he's pretty much said if he's got to put the auditorium back, he ain't gonna do it, okay? Well, if the agreement said he was supposed to have insurance to cover the bill and everything, let him take his insurance money and whatever money out of his pocket he needs to do, put it back like it was, and walk away. I mean, it was a poor planned deal from the get-go with, on this, with the council, the way they done it. And it shouldn't have been that way. It should have been, if he wanted it, and being as they was giving it to him anyway, it should have, the day they signed it, it should have been his then. This 2-year thing shouldn't have been in there to start with. We wouldn't be in this dilemma now if it was. So he can put it back like it was, walk away from it as far as I'm concerned. But I do not think we need to change the zoning on this. There again, I think putting the cart before the horse, because unless somebody has said somewhere along the line, well, we're going to approve this, we're going to approve this, why change the zoning first? Get it approved, and then let them change the zoning.
We're not, the zoning has already
Well,
been changed. We're just looking at
the
the
ordinance.
conditional use, which
Right.
would add 10 more units.
I got you.
Okay.
I understand
All
that,
right.
but I just, it all falls under one thing, from what I'm
Okay,
saying.
I just want to make sure you
Mr.
understand.
Clay, your concern is with the original agreement.
Yeah.
You disagree with that, not necessarily what's going on here today. You wanted to express your dissatisfaction with the original agreement.
Well, no, what I want to express is, he had an agreement, he needs to put the auditorium back in there. If he had it uninsured, that's his problem.
That's
So
what-
why get this changed? Why get the permit changed? Because he didn't have enough insurance to put the auditorium back. That's my point.
Would you agree that's more for the council to, I'm guessing you're coming Tuesday?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's what I'm saying. I don't see why this should have been done today anyway. It should have went to council first, and then see if if they go along with this cat and go ahead and agree to change the original agreement with him, and then at that point, you change the conditional use permit to add the extra 10 apartments, okay? But anyway, that's all I'll say, and that's the way I feel, and I just think, you know, I've been a realtor here for 32 years. So I know how real estate is around here, I know how it works. I know how investment property works, I probably rent most of the rental property in Bedford. And I know that if you keep getting an influx of extra stuff that is not needed, it hurts everybody. And if he was gonna put in 50 units to start with, that was still too many, but if he's gonna get 10 more, it's even 10 more too many. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. Like I said, there's several others that do, but they couldn't be here tonight. But hopefully they'll be here Tuesday. But that's what we're looking at. Y'all need to start thinking about the people that's here and that's been spending money here all their life, not somebody that's just coming in here trying to do something different and try to act like a savior, because that's not what happened. That's not what's happening. It'll show up in the long run.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So we have, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the discussion about what to do with that building has gone on a long, long time. And obviously, we got pretty well divided what to do. Looks to me, bring this decision today is down to this. It always was going to be a traffic nightmare. I don't care what way to slice it. That the reason we couldn't make the pass-through because they didn't want to carry down the cafeteria. Just no way to put a road through there without, they couldn't take the cafeteria down because that would destroy the historic campus, and then couldn't get the grants, or not the grants, but the historical credits. Is that correct, Mr. McCormick? That you couldn't take down the cafeteria because that would screw up the campus, right? Okay. So fire, I guess, that nobody ever thought about that except for the accessibility of the trucks. But our decision today, as I see it, is that we're being asked to approve 10 more apartments. I think that's what it's coming down to, right, guys? And what I'm working on is that if you get $1,200 a month from those apartments, right, that's $144,000 a year. Is that right?
No.
No? You get more than that?
No.
Less than that?
That's right.
Okay, that makes it even worse. Well, you're saying the financial valuability, this depends on getting these apartments. You mean $100,000 in revenue is going to determine whether this thing goes or not? And again, that's
It's the
not part
cost
of our
of
decision. That's
renovating.
not part of our decision.
It's the cost of putting the
Well,
auditorium.
I understand that, I understand that. But what I'm saying is, so he's got to reproduce them, but then he's got to get that, to spend more money. I mean, the thing is, I do question some of the economics.
Well, can I explain that to you if you want, if a decision hinges on that, happy to talk about that.
Well, my thought is, I'd like to understand, because obviously you want this project to work. And I've always, my position, I think I've been very clear, is that I hate the idea of keeping the cafeteria, and I hate the idea of keeping the gym. But again, that's just my own personal opinion. Okay, I think
Why don't I speak to the financial impact?
I'd like to hear about it.
Sorry. Yeah, so if something makes $1, the bank looks at that income and does what's called a cap rate calculation and divides by some yield number to get a value of that dollar in terms of a loan. So if something makes $100,000 and the cap rate's 10%, you just divide the 100,000 by 10%, and you get $1 million of valuation. So a little bit of money goes a long way when it comes to underwriting a loan. That is why we want to add these additional apartments to the deal, so we can borrow the money to make the project work. You seem maybe that's confusing, but that's how this works at
I'm going to pay it back too, right? So the idea is that that money that you borrow.
But that's what my point is $100,000. We're not talking about $100,000 making or breaking a project. We're talking about, well, millions, and that's the difference.
Getting a loan. You need another $1 million more to get the loan.
Right, and I'm rounding the numbers. It's actually a slightly more aggressive than that. But the point is we're trying to, when in an underwriting scenario, that gross income is really important. It's not a small number.
How is it going to work without it?
How will it work without it?
How is it going to work without it when you just had the auditorium there?
Because I didn't have to spend $1 in the auditorium to keep it.
But you weren't going to get more revenue out of it either. You're looking.
Right, it was a net
50,000
wash.
apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Or 50 apartments.
It's-
Obviously, we're in a situation here, I mean, I don't want to be the person that says, screw this up, but I have questions about it, but um,
I'll say generally, these.
To talk to me about how to raise money. And,
Well, James, you've been against this thing since day one, so it doesn't surprise me that you have, issues.
I've
But
just been against the way it's been done. I think that the apartments would have been cool.
Yeah.
And I think the hotel would be cool.
Well,
I think that that too many cars, gonna be, you're cramming in a small space. And I think I don't think that's doing anybody any favor.
again, the parking is not changing. I don't know if that's,
I understand it's not changing.
okay, I want to make sure that's really clear.
Yeah, but you weren't parking, that thing wasn't laid out to have 400 people come to the auditorium either. We all talked about how they're gonna find parking.
Right, we had to get even more parking down there in the overflow. Talk about a crush of and demand in the town. I really think it's really important that anyone who, when you look at this, how to develop these old buildings, it's very complex. And it doesn't always make sense and logic to people that don't do it for a living. I know it makes logical sense to think about destroying the cafeteria and just open up the parking. But that actually falls short of the standards at the National Park Service level. They don't want to see that. So you have to work within these constraints. And there's so much complexity. And even one of those complexities is dealing with an abandoned building too, and all the complexities that come with that. It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and sometimes it doesn't go your way. And so we're trying to figure out a way to make it go our way. But it's not as simple as just walking up and saying, well, that can go, this can say. If we weren't getting historic tax credits, you could do all that, but then you wouldn't actually have a project. That's the thing. And if you're willing to think about that and really discuss it and explore the complexity of it, you can understand it. If you just don't want to do that, I also understand that. So it's not an easy thing to do a project like this, and it's especially not easy to do it in a small town like this. It's really, really, really hard. And sometimes things don't go our way. But here we are, and that's all I can say to it. But that financing piece is critical. It's not about 100,000, it's about much, much more than that. And that's why I'm asking for this to happen.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor, which is to deny the changing of the conditional use to add the additional 10 units, and we have a second. I think we should have a voice call
We
vote.
call for the motion. Call for the,
Pardon me?
I see you got a motion on the floor, do you not?
We do have a motion on the floor, so we need to vote on it. Let's have a roll call vote. Darren?
I vote against the motion.
Okay. Mr. Tennant?
For it.
For the motion.
Against the motion.
Against the motion.
And should I vote? Yes, I am also against the motion. So the motion has failed. Do we need a new motion?
You do need to make a recommendation to council.
Okay.
I'll move the recommended amendment as outlined.
And do we have a second?
Second.
And then we'll do a roll call again?
Aye.
What was that?
I voted to recommend the amendment.
Right.
A motion to recommend the amendment, it's been seconded, now we voted, I voted aye,
Right.
yes.
So you need to vote.
And what are we amending the motion?
As
Your
out-
motion failed
Yes.
to
correct.
deny the request,
It's okay.
or to deny the change.
Yes.
Now we have a motion on the floor to approve the change.
Somebody's got a second, right?
Yes.
And second, and I
Second.
voted aye.
We are asking for you to vote. Okay.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that motion is.
Council's gonna do what they wanna do anyway,
Exactly.
is that not right? I mean, council doesn't need our approval to do anything. This is just a formality, so council's gonna do what they're gonna do, so.
They consider our recommendation. recommendation.
Do what?
They consider our
Yeah,
recommendation.
right. Right.
So we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is unfinished
Thank
business.
you very much.
Thank you.
That's 2 times he's won these beats, this
Will you
committee.
say this as a?
2 times.
Well, I was here the
That's
first
pretty
time.
good.
I know. Go ahead.
Are we at unfinished business?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Hopefully this won't be quite as controversial or complicated. No, I just want to report that we talked about this at our last meeting. The committee comprised of the planning commission, the council, and staff met and reviewed proposals to review the zoning ordinance from 4 qualified firms. The recommendation of the committee was to recommend EPR Associates of Charlottesville to the council for their action. So again, this is another advisory opinion that you would be asked to provide. Ultimately, it would be council's decision, but would ask for you to consider a motion to recommend entering into negotiations with EPR Associates for reviewing our zoning ordinance.
And you want us to do that now?
Please.
Okay. Do we have a motion regarding recommending that council consider EPR and negotiating with EPR about redoing our zoning ordinance?
Those in favor?
Some,
We need a motion.
I move that we recommend.
Okay.
second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Do we have any additional public comment this evening? No? If not, we will adjourn. Thank you.